the most intense moments on paternity court.
How did you not have contact if she gave you a picture of her at 2?
When you was the one committing adultery too, did you not forget that I walked in on you in our home?
For other people in Thomasville, I'm sorry. You're gonna know. I don't need a dad now. I needed one then. When I was growing up, I needed a dad in my family.
Are you gonna do all the
I
talking?
needed that.
Let me
I'm
talk.
telling you how I feel.
Ms. Smith is 100% certain that the father of her child is Mr. Womack. But Mr. Womack says he had nothing romantic with Ms. Smith, and his encounters with her were simply casual.
Mr. Womack, you claim that there was nothing romantic about the casual hookups you had with the plaintiff, and you deny you fathered her daughter.
But one has to ask if that matters. Children are born from romantic and unromantic encounters all the time. The type of encounter doesn't matter at all. In the text Ms. Smith sent, she tells Mr. Womack that she's just had his baby.
If she was 100% sure that she was my baby, why wait 3 years to tell me? Someone texts me out of the blue, 3 years later, I have your baby, and I just accept it.
Ms. Smith says her child is 4 and she needs a father figure in her life. Ms. Smith has also apparently been showing her daughter Adriana photos of her dad from Facebook without making her meet him. This means Adriana only knows her father from Facebook and has never met him before. Imagine that.
Stuff had happened a long time ago, and I didn't have, the courage to tell Mr. Womack. I just showed her Facebook pictures.
Yes, that's nasty. No dinner, no dates, nothing, just direct messages. It looks like Mr. Womack is a very successful playboy. Ms. Smith says she cannot count how many times she and Mr. Womack were intimate. Mr. Womack, on the other hand, insists that it was just 3 times. Now, this is getting interesting.
How many times did you have sex?
A lot.
It was 3, Your Honor.
No,
3 times?
3 times.
No, it wasn't, Your Honor.
I can count
Okay.
on one hand 3 times, Your Honor.
Come on, guys, this just sounds too messy. It sounds like Ms. Smith is saying she thought Mr. Womack was always pulling out and never finishing. What makes it even more messy is that Ms. Smith said child support had done a DNA test on the man she was seeing at the same time as Mr. Womack, and the test revealed that he wasn't the father. That's why she returned to Mr. Womack.
Child support had did a DNA test, and the DNA test had said that he wasn't the father. So I went back to Mr. Womack.
Apparently, Ms. Smith was sleeping with Mr. Womack's family member. Ms. Smith says she did sleep with one of Mr. Womack's family members, but it wasn't during the period she conceived her daughter.
She also slept with other family members.
How could it be a family member's baby?
She was messing around with him.
With the family member?
Yes, ma'am.
Were you messing around with a family member, Miss Smith?
Yes, Your Honor.
And now another of Mr. Womack's cousins is in court to testify against Ms. Smith. And he has some pretty hurtful things to say. And yes, it gets even worse.
Everybody knows her as, the go-to girl, so,
You say she
finger
was
pointing.
the go-to girl.
Yes, ma'am.
And I don't want to put words in your mouth. Go-to for sex?
Yes, ma'am.
It's clear that Ms. Smith regrets leading this sort of life, and it's hurtful that things like this are being said about her when she's just trying to get her daughter a father. Now that that's done, let's get to the results and see what the truth is. The only way for Ms. Smith and Mr. Womack to go forward is with the truth. And here is what the truth says.
Mr. Womack, you are the father.
Kayla Brown says her life was turned upside down when a man contacted her claiming to be her birth father. This man, Mr. Hampton, says he has evidence to prove that he is Ms. Brown's father. He said he had some pictures of her and then said that he wanted to connect with her. Now let's see what Mr. Hampton has to say.
I've been looking for my daughter for 20 years, Your Honor.
Okay.
I was in love with her mother, Your Honor, and
You all were in a relationship?
yes, we were in a relationship, Your Honor, and she was pregnant, Your Honor. This was my first child.
Mr. Hampton presents a couple of pictures that he says prove that he's Ms. Brown's father. He also says that the only reason he was separated from Me Brown and her mother was because he had to travel, and that he regrets doing that every single day.
I had the opportunity to take you when I met her at the mall. I didn't know whether she wanted me to take you permanently. I couldn't take you at the time. I had to go back to Seattle. I cried every minute on the plane.
Mr. Hampton says he hasn't seen Miss Brown since she was about 2 weeks old, but says he has a picture of her at 2 years old that her mother gave to him when he met her a while back. And the picture looks a lot like Miss Brown.
And I still have that, I've kept that photo on my wall for the last 20 years, Your Honor.
This picture?
I've kept that photo on my wall.
And she's 2 years old?
And she's 2 years old, Your Honor.
So this is a picture of, wow.
Ms. Brown's adopted mother now comes into court, and she has an interesting testimony to give. Things are about to get even more intense. She says 3 to 4 men were tested to find out who Ms. Brown's father was, but the government couldn't establish paternity. Interestingly, Mr. Hampton was never tested by the government as a potential biological father for Miss Brown. And now, it gets worse.
I took this child several different times, at least for sure 3 times, if not 4 times, in for blood tests.
Okay.
And watched them draw blood from her to try to determine who her father was. And they never could determine who the father was.
Despite all of this, Ms. Brown and her mother say they've never heard of Mr. Hampton before in their life. Despite all the paperwork showing communications with the government, they still insist that this is the first time they are ever hearing about Mr. Hampton.
Out of the 3 to 4 times that you took your baby, Kayla, Ms. Brown, in to be tested so they could try to establish paternity,
Yes.
never once was Mr. Hampton tested.
I've
You don't
never
remember
heard-
him being...
I've never heard his name
Never
in
heard
my
his name.
life.
You can clearly see the disbelief on Mr. Hampton's face. He cannot believe this is happening to him. It's like a horrible, horrible dream. Hold up, hold up. Why is Ms. Brown speaking to him like that? She's just 20 years old, and the way she's being arrogant to this man who's clearly shown that he loves her and cares about her is extraordinary.
Do you feel like Mr. Hampton is her biological father?
I mean, honestly, I kind of feel like you are, but you didn't take me when she asked you, you know? I don't care for how long. It does, you know, even if you couldn't, I look at my son. I would do it.
But now it's time for us to discover the truth behind this puzzle.
Mr. Hampton, you have desperately waited for this answer. You are not her father.
Mr. and Mrs. McGee are having a huge problem. Mr. McGee doesn't believe that he's the father of his estranged wife's daughter and thinks a DNA test will clear up that misconception. Mrs. McGee, on the other hand, insists that he is the father. She says that Mr. McGee vanished from her life after she gave birth to her child 4 years ago and has refused to help her financially.
You claim your husband vanished 4 years ago after the birth of your child and has denied fathering your daughter and refuses to help you financially.
Yes, Your Honor.
Hold up, hold up! Mrs. McGee is saying that she let her husband know that it is possible that her child's Serenity might not belong to him. That means she was most definitely cheating on her husband around the time she conceived. But if there is a slight possibility that Serenity wasn't Mr. McGee's child, how is she so sure she is today?
You haven't helped Mr. McGee?
Your Honor, I don't believe that Serenity is mine, so I didn't see any need to help.
How you not feel she yours when you know me and you were messing around the time I conceived?
No, because you were messing around with multiple.
You what?
Mr. McGee doesn't deny this at all. He admits that he was in a sexual relationship with Mrs. McGee, but he doesn't accept Serenity because multiple people have told him that he isn't Serenity's father. But come on, does that really sound like a great argument? People telling you that your child isn't yours is a very bad reason to abandon that child.
But I don't believe because not only her, but multiple family members of hers is informing they think that I'm not the father of the child. It so happened that we had a Super Bowl party. So we were drinking and stuff. She ended up falling asleep.
Mr. McGee says the only reason he married Mrs. McGee after having Serenity is because he thought he was in love with her. And now that he no longer is in love with her, he doesn't see any reason to continue to support her. But that really just seems like an excuse to abandon his responsibilities to Serenity.
I thought I was in love with her.
You thought you was in love with me?
Yeah, and that...
Being in love with me don't have nothing to do with you not taking care of your responsibilities.
She's not my responsibility.
She is your responsibility.
This is all extremely messy. Mr. McGee is making some horrible arguments here. What does he mean he'll pay just 25% of the child support? The child is either his or she isn't. If she is his, then he must pay the entire child support. And if she isn't, he pays nothing. He cannot just pay 25%.
About 3 or 4 other guys that can be her father. I'll pay 25%, and then they could pay the other 75%.
Are you kidding me right now?
Excuse me.
Now, the crazy thing is Mrs. McGee's mother is now in court to testify against Mrs. McGee, saying that Serenity is not Mr. McGee's child. That's right. Mrs. McGee is taking Mr. McGee's side, not the side of her child.
Your Honor, they were in and out of relationship, and my daughter was just out there. We have a relationship, and she talked to me, okay? And so, no, I do not believe that he's the father because I knew my daughter was out there.
Mrs. McGee's mother is saying that the only reason why Mrs. McGee wants to pin this child on Mr. McGee is because she doesn't want people to know she had a child outside of wedlock. But that logic is horrible because 3 of them are on paternity court right now, and Mrs. McGee has already confessed that she used to cheat on her husband. But even at that, it's hard to get over the fact that Mrs. McGee's mother is betraying her like this.
When this test comes back, he is my child's father. I want an apology from you, and I want one from you. Because if I was out there, how I know who my child's father is? I admitted to him that I made mistakes throughout our relationship. We had a relationship until you betrayed me.
It's not that I betray her. Your Honor, I only can go by what my daughter said to me. That's it.
And what?
You might not believe it, but things are about to get even more intense. It appears that Mrs. McGee also has a future fiancé, and Mrs. McGee's mother believes that this man, who Mrs. McGee has been in a relationship with for the last 4 years, is the father of Serenity.
I believe that it's my daughter's future fiancé is the father of my granddaughter.
Are you kidding me right now?
That's what I believe.
Now, here's the question. Was Mrs. McGee intimate with this man during the period of conception of Serenity? The answer appears to be yes. And it also seems like she was intimate with him without protection.
Your mother says your current boyfriend, future fiance, she believes he is the father. Were you intimate with him during the window of conception?
Once.
With protection or without?
Without.
Without.
So now it's dicey. It's time for us to read the results and know who is the father.
The biological father is Mr. McGee.
How you feel now?
Mr. Fritz has been looking for his biological daughter over the last 30 years. He says his daughter was taken from him as a child, but 4 months ago he found her on Facebook. He's now in paternity court to ask for a DNA test to prove that Ms. A.G. is his biological daughter. That's all a load of rubbish to Ms. Angel, who argues that she knows who her biological father is and says it's most certainly not Mr. Fritz.
The guy that's on my birth certificate was not my biological father. He was married to my mother when I was born, but I do know who my biological father is, and my grandmother was the one who raised me. She told me my biological father was Buster. That's the only person she knew as my biological father.
Ms. Angel tried to contact her biological father again, but she couldn't. She had her first child when she was 17 and wanted her father to know that he had a grandchild and could even have more on the way. She went to see his sister and she said that Buster would contact her. But he never did, and now she's 35.
I was 17 when I had my first child. I got married, and I was pregnant with my second child when I was 18. And I wanted to look for him because I was gonna let him know that he has a daughter out here that, have one grandbaby, and he's gonna have another grandbaby. We went to his house, his sister's house, talked with her. I got pictures of him, but she said that if he's my dad, he will contact me. And I haven't heard from him since, and I'm 35.
Now, Mr. Fritz says he spent the last 30 years looking for his daughter. Mr. Fritz says he couldn't reach out directly to Miss Angel because he was in prison. While in prison, he asked his friend to reach out to Miss Angel's parents and tell them about his situation. He also says that at some point he escaped prison to go and see Miss Angel when she was 2 years old and presented pictures from that meeting in court.
I met a friend of mine. I said, hey, man, when you get back in town, will you run by and let Angel's family know that I've been transferred and where I was going to come see me. After 3 months, I escaped from the penitentiary to go see my daughter, and at 2 months old, I went and seen my daughter.
If those pictures are real, they mean that Mr. Fritz is most likely telling the truth. Ms. Angel also acknowledges that those are her pictures. But Ms. Angel insists that if Mr. Fritz wanted to find her, he would have. Mr. Fritz, on the other hand, says he tried his absolute best, but just had no success finding her. Ms. Angel says it doesn't matter, and that she would have found her kids regardless no matter what.
I'm telling you, if you wanted to find me, you could have found me.
Well, I tried and I couldn't find you.
If you want to find your daughter, you will not stop. I don't care what anybody says. If my kids are out there and I want to find my kids, I'm going to find them, regardless.
I didn't stop.
It's clear that Ms. Angel is very angry with Mr. Fritz for not looking for her. At this point, it doesn't look like she's disputing that he's her father. She's just really angry that he didn't do enough to find her. But is that the whole story? The incredible thing here is that even the man who calls himself her biological father never showed up for her and has still not shown up. At this point, it seems Ms. Angel is just scared of being hurt.
Just fearful to be hurt again. For another man to say, I'm your dad, you matter to me, and then the next thing you know, they're not there.
Exactly, you're right.
Okay.
That ain't
I've been hurt
gonna
enough
happen,
in my
man.
life, and I don't want to be hurt
You ain't
anymore.
gonna be by yourself no more. I'm gonna tell you that.
This touching moment just shows how much Mr. Fritz loves Miss Angel. At this point, it seems the DNA test result itself will be a mere formality. So let's get to it.
It has been determined by this court.
I am her
Mr.
daddy.
Fritz, you are her father.
Yes!
That's what I'm talking about.
Ms. Fallon Hannon spent the first 13 years of her life thinking the man she lived with was her father. However, one day he abruptly dropped a bombshell on her and told her that he wasn't her father. Later on, her mother told her on her deathbed the name of her supposed father.
Miss Hannon, you grew up believing one man was your father until the age of 13 when he said, I am not your daddy.
Yes, ma'am.
She's in court today to find out whether the man her mother told her about, David Dorsey, is truly her father. But Mr. David Dorsey has a far more interesting story to tell. Ms. Hannon says she's always been told that she looked just like a woman named Melanie Dorsey, and she always knew that people were talking about a long-lost sister that she had. And now, she's going to meet Mr. Dorsey, her biological father, for the first time.
After my mom's passing, I moved away. My grandmother got sick, so I came back. I was actually at work, walking down the hall, and she was calling me Melanie. Melanie, do you hear me talking to you? She got all the way close, and I'm like, ma'am, that's not my name. Melanie, but you're talking about Melanie Dorsey, right? And she's like, yeah.
Ms. Hannon now invites her godmother onto the stand to testify about Mr. Dorsey. This godmother, Ms. Alexander, says that she used to see Mr. Dorsey deliver gifts to Ms. Hannon's mom as a young woman. But Mr. Dorsey claims this is a lie. He insists he's never met Ms. Hannon's mom or has ever been intimate with her.
Mr. Dorsey, I have seen him come to the job to bring her mom lunch. Her mom would talk about her baby daddy being David.
Your Honor,
You don't remember any of
Your
this?
Honor, I've never had sex with this woman.
You worked at the fast food restaurant, though.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you know how insane that is? If it turns out that Ms. Hannon is really his child? To complicate things further, Mr. Dorsey's child, Melanie Dorsey, comes into the courtroom to give her testimony. In her testimony, she accepts that Ms. Hannon is her sister and hopes that the DNA proves that Mr. Dorsey is Ms. Hannon's dad. Now let's see who's telling the truth.
That's my sister. You know, I don't mean to disrespect my dad, but my dad was a Rolling Stone, okay? He was very known on the North Side for being David Watkins, you know, the slayer of women.
Mr. Dorsey, who says he's never seen Ms. Hannon's mother, or Ms. Hannon, who believes that her mother had a relationship with Mr. Dorsey. The answer may astound you.
Mr. Dorsey, you are not the father.